Cragmore Mental Hospital. Even its name sounded like a curse. A hulking silhouette against the storm-brewing sky, it was a place even the owls avoided. Tonight it was my personal purgatory, brick and iron, cold and unyielding. Built in 1898, Cragmore had witnessed a century of madness. Hysteria, delusion, violence, it seeped into the very walls. They say places like this hold on to things, echoes of suffering. Tonight, I was the only audience. The air hung heavy, thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of old blood. Or maybe that was just my imagination. 30 years this place had stood empty, a monument to forgotten horrors. 30 years, and they decided to close it down the day after I clocked in for my first shift. 30 years on the graveyard shift, and tonight was my swan song. Good riddance, some might say. But Cragmore and I, we had an understanding. We were both shadows, clinging to the edge of a world that had moved on. My name's Jake, ex-cop, they call me. Though ex implies I had a choice in the matter. Life had a way of pushing you down roads you never intended to travel. Cragmore was the last stop on a long line of dead ends. The night shift suited me. Silence was a familiar friend, and the darkness held no surprises. Out here on the fringes of civilization, I could pretend the world wasn't a swirling mess of chaos and regret. Tonight was different, though. A weight hung in the air, thicker than usual. The silence was too quiet, broken only by the creak of the buildings settling around me. My hand instinctively went to the revolver holstered at my hip. Old habits die hard, even when you know the only thing lurking in the shadows is your own reflection, or so I told myself. The routine was always the same. Check the doors, patrol the perimeter, fight off the boredom. Cragmore might be abandoned, but that didn't stop the occasional thrill-seeker or urban explorer from trying their luck. Most of them never made it past the front gate. The ones that did usually didn't come back for seconds. Cragmore had a way of getting under your skin, burrowing into your bones. It wasn't the kind of place you visited twice. Tonight, though, even the rats seemed to be keeping their distance. The silence was unnerving. It was the kind of silence that makes you want to scream just to break the tension. My gut churned with a feeling I couldn't quite place. Unease? Apprehension? Whatever it was. It clung to me like a bad smell. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. A low moan echoed from the depths of the building, quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence. I stopped, holding my breath, straining to identify the source. The wind, maybe? A pipe groaning. My flashlight beam danced across the peeling paint, revealing nothing but dust and decay. And yet the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. The air felt different here, colder somehow, charged. Another sound, this time a soft scratching coming from the far end of the hall. My pulse quickened. Rational thought battled with primal instinct. It was probably just an animal, a stray cat that had wandered in from the storm, but something about the way the sound sent chills down my spine told me this was something different, something sinister. This wasn't in the job description. Then again, neither was any of this. Back in the relative warmth of the security office, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. I ran a hand over the familiar lines of the building blueprint, each room, each corridor etched into my memory. My gaze snagged on a peculiar blank space near the east wing. It remained stubbornly vacant, as if someone had forgotten to fill in the details. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Cragmore held no secrets from me. At least not on this side of the veil. Every groan of its pipes, every sigh of the wind through its broken windows was a familiar lullaby. Yet this blank space whispered of the unknown. A chill snaked down my spine, and for the first time in 30 years, I felt genuine fear. This wasn't a prank or a figment of my imagination. Cragmore was a puzzle box, and tonight I was meant to unlock its final horrifying secret. Following the blueprint's cryptic guidance, I found myself at the end of a forgotten corridor in the East Wing. The air here was noticeably colder, a damp, stagnant chill that seeped into my bones. And there it was, the unmarked door. No handle, no window, just a solid slab of oak. It was as if the building itself was trying to hide this door. Each tick of the old grandfather clock echoed like a death knell. This was madness, plain and simple. But Cragmore had a way of making you do crazy things. The rusty latch groaned in protest as I threw my weight against the door. It yielded with a tortured shriek. The darkness beyond seemed to reach out, eager to swallow me whole. My flashlight beam struggled against the oppressive gloom, revealing a small rectangular room. Dust motes danced in the thin ray of light, swirling like tiny ghosts disturbed from their slumber. The smell hit me first, a noxious blend of mildew, stale air, and something else I couldn't quite place. The room was sparsely furnished, a single iron bed frame with restraints bolted to the headboard, a rusted metal chair, and a small barred window, its glass long since boarded up. It was a cell, designed to contain something monstrous. The oppressive silence pressed in on me, broken only by the rasp of my own breath. This room had a story to tell, a tale whispered in the peeling paint and the rusted shackles, a story of unimaginable suffering and despair. The air grew thick, heavy with unseen presences. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn back, to flee this place before it consumed me whole. And that's when I saw him, a figure, shrouded in darkness, huddled in the far corner of the room. My breath hitched in my chest, my finger tightening on the trigger of my flashlight. It was a man, or at least the remnants of one. He was dressed in what looked like a tattered straitjacket, his arms bound tightly at his sides. His head hung at an unnatural angle, his face obscured by the shadows. But I could feel his gaze on me, burning into me with an intensity that defied the darkness. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out while I still could. But my feet were rooted to the spot, frozen by a morbid fascination. Who was this man, and what was he doing in this forgotten corner of Cragmore? Time seemed to stop. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a silent scream trapped between us. My finger twitched on the flashlight switch, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from those eyes. They held a lifetime of suffering, a depth of madness that made my blood run cold. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me with an unnerving intensity, as if peering into the darkest recesses of my soul. His silence was more terrifying than any scream. It was the silence of the grave, the sound of sanity unraveling. My grip tightened on the flashlight, the cold metal offering little comfort. My pulse pounded in my ears, a frantic counterpoint to the eerie silence of the room. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get away from this place, from him. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, caught in the pull of something ancient and evil. This was a side of Cragmore even I hadn't encountered, a darkness that whispered of things best left undisturbed. "Help! Me!" The voice, when it came, was a dry rasp, barely audible above the pounding of my heart. It seemed to slither out of the darkness, wrapping around me like a shroud. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, the beam spinning wildly before settling on the opposite wall. He was younger than I expected. His face, though gaunt and pale, held the remnants of youthful features, now twisted in a grotesque parody of a smile. His eyes, however, remained those bottomless pits of despair, reflecting a torment that transcended time and sanity. "Who are you?" My voice, when I finally found it, was a strained whisper, barely recognizable as my own. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. The shadows seemed to deepen around him, pressing in, as if eager to reclaim their captive. Section 3, Whispers of Truth. They promised freedom, but they lied. His words were like shards of glass, sharp and fragmented, pieced together from the broken remnants of his sanity. He spoke of doctors, of experiments, of a darkness that consumed all those who dared to enter this place. He spoke of a power, ancient and evil, that seeped into the very walls of Cragmore, feeding on the suffering of the patients, twisting their minds, and leaving them husks of their former selves. They called me Subject Zero. His voice cracked, breaking under the weight of his words. They couldn't control it. The darkness, it consumed them all. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. The shadows seemed to deepen around him, pressing in as if eager to reclaim their captive. Section 4, The Mark of Madness. As he spoke, I noticed something strange. The stain on his straitjacket, the one I'd initially mistaken for blood, seemed to be spreading, pulsing faintly in the dim light. It wasn't a stain, not anymore. It was something else entirely, but I embraced it. His voice, once a raspy whisper, was now strong, filled with a chilling glee. It gave me power beyond your wildest dreams. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls closing in, suffocating. And then I understood. This wasn't a plea for help, it was a warning. Section 5, The Escape. I scrambled back, tripping over my own feet as I struggled to escape the cell. The stench of decay and madness clung to me, a suffocating reminder of the horror I'd stumbled upon. The hallway seemed endless, the darkness alive with unseen threats. I could hear him behind me, his laughter echoing through the empty corridors, each chilling peal a promise of unimaginable torment. My flashlight rolled away, plunging me into absolute darkness. Panic surged through me, a primal scream trapped in my throat. I was trapped, hunted in this labyrinth of madness. You cannot escape your destiny. His voice, closer now, slithered through the darkness, a promise and a threat all in one. Primal terror. The hunt begins. Blind panic seized me. My lungs burned, each breath a shallow gasp. The flashlight, my only lifeline, bounced erratically, casting grotesque shadows that danced and twisted, mimicking the horrors unfolding in my mind. Every door I slammed against, every corridor I raced down only led to another dead end. The asylum seemed to twist and turn around me, a labyrinth designed to trap me within its nightmare. A laugh, cold and hollow, echoed behind me, sending chills down my spine. He was toying with me, herding me like a rat in a maze, savoring my terror. My hand scraped against something cold and metallic, the flashlight. Relief washed over me, quickly turning to ice as I realized the beam was fading, the batteries nearing their end. The asylum itself felt different now, hostile. The once familiar layout seemed to shift and change, landmarks disappearing, replaced by macabre murals that writhed and pulsed in the flickering light. Panic gnawed at my sanity. I was losing myself in this labyrinth of shadows and whispers, my mind playing tricks on me, feeding my terror. "This is insane," I muttered, my voice a raspy whisper in the suffocating silence. But even as I said the words, I knew the truth. This went beyond insanity. This was something far older, far more evil. Cragmore was no longer a building, but a predator, and I was caught in its web, a fly struggling in the grip of a spider. The sight of moonlight, however faint, sent a surge of hope through me. A way out. I lunged toward the boarded window, my fingers prying at the rotting wood. With a grunt, I tore away another board, then another, widening the gap. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and earth, a stark contrast to the cloying stench of decay that permeated the asylum. Freedom, and then darkness. My flashlight sputtered, gasped its last breath, and died, and the laughter began. My blood ran cold. He stood at the opposite end of the hallway, bathed in the pale moonlight, his features obscured by shadow, but his presence unmistakable. He hadn't needed the light to find me. He knew, he'd always known. "You cannot outrun your destiny," his voice echoed, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. Panic threatened to consume me, but I fought it back. There was nowhere left to run, no time to think. This was it, the final confrontation. Each step he took towards me seemed to drain the air from my lungs. The darkness itself seemed to press in, suffocating, heavy with the weight of his madness. Desperation lent me strength. I ripped a loose board free from the window frame, the splintered wood cold and rough in my hand. It wouldn't be enough, but it was all I had. "Get back!" I roared, charging forward, the board a blur in the moonlight. He didn't flinch. He simply smiled, a grotesque, almost pitiful expression on his face. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me were his eyes, filled not with malice, but with a chilling emptiness. A void that threatened to swallow me whole. Echoes of madness the truth revealed. The truth, as it often does, emerged from the shadows, pieced together from whispers in the dark and fragments of forgotten memories. Cragmore, it turned out, was more than just a mental institution. It was a breeding ground for something far more sinister. The doctors who ran Cragmore weren't healers, but disciples of a darker science. They believed they could harness the very essence of madness, bend it to their will, unlock the hidden potential of the human mind. They were wrong. Subject Zero, the man I encountered in the depths of the asylum, wasn't a victim, not entirely. He was their masterpiece, their greatest triumph, and their ultimate downfall. He was the culmination of years of twisted experiments, a conduit for an ancient evil that even they couldn't comprehend. They thought they could control him, contain him within the walls of Cragmore. They were fools to believe that darkness could ever be contained. Subject Zero, the legacy of terror. Subject Zero became a vessel, a conduit for something ancient and evil, a force that fed on suffering, on despair, on the very essence of human madness. It spread like a virus, consuming the doctors, the staff, the very walls of Cragmore, twisting and corrupting everything it touched. The asylum became a breeding ground for nightmares, a place where sanity went to die. The patients weren't just ill anymore, they were possessed, twisted into something monstrous. Their minds and bodies slaves to a force beyond human comprehension. The official story was mass hysteria, a breakdown of order, an unexplained tragedy that forced the authorities to shut down Cragmore, brick it up and forget it ever existed. But the truth, as I learned that night, was far more horrifying. Subject Zero wasn't contained. He was unleashed. Final transmission, a desperate plea. It's here, it's real. The darkness, it's spreading. The footage I recovered that night from the security cameras, the last images ever captured within the walls of Cragmore, told a story that chilled me to the bone. Jake, my predecessor, the grizzled veteran who thought he'd seen it all, was reduced to a gibbering wreck, a shell of a man haunted by a truth he couldn't escape. It's not just a place, it's an infection. It gets inside you. It takes you. His words, his final desperate plea, echoed in the silence, a warning from beyond the grave. Cragmore wasn't just a haunted building, it was a vector, a point of origin for something far more insidious. Cragmore's shadow, the lingering dread. The asylum still stands, a monolith of brick and madness, a silent sentinel on the edge of town. They say some places hold on to things, echoes of suffering, whispers of tormented souls. Cragmore doesn't just hold on to them, it amplifies them, nurtures them, offers them as a sacrifice to the darkness that festers at its core. And the worst part? The darkness is spreading, it's in the whispers of the wind, in the shadows that stretch longer with each passing night. It's in the eyes of the people you pass on the street, a flicker of something ancient and hungry lurking beneath the surface. Cragmore might be silent, but its legacy lives on. A constant reminder that some doors are best left unopened, some secrets better left buried.